Democrats convene in Chicago to elect presidential and vice presidential nominees. Senator Harry S. Truman of Missouri is nominated as the running mate for FDR.
It's been my privilege to be a United States Senator for the past 9.5 years, and I expect to continue the effort to help shorten the war and win the peace under the direction of our great leader, Franklin D. Roosevelt. And Japan in battle, and respect the rights of other nations. Iwo Jima. Aircraft of the strategic airport are now attacking military targets in and around Tokyo.
The operation to be allies on all fronts has now brought the German war to its final stage till its time comes. We must continue fighting till the final count. We know our enemy well. We must expect him to fight hard to save our lives.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. President Roosevelt.
Vice President Harry Truman, who from here on will be President Truman, went immediately to the White House.
The gravest question mark in every American heart is about Truman. Can he swing the job? And despite his limited capabilities, I think he can.
He comes into office almost unknown to the people at large, and they will await with great anxiety the result of the test that he has to meet.
Roosevelt was a great architect. Perhaps Truman will be a good carpenter.
When people think of President Truman, it is with a mixture of friendliness, loyalty, and gentle skepticism.
No man ever came to the presidency of the United States under more difficult circumstances than does Harry S. Truman.
It would be foolish to pretend that President Truman possesses the qualities of leadership needed by the nation at the moment.
Of President of these United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Democrats convene in Chicago to elect presidential and vice presidential nominees. Senator Harry S. Truman of Missouri is nominated as the running mate for FDR.
It's been my privilege to be a United States Senator for the past 9.5 years, and I expect to continue the effort to help shorten the war and win the peace under the direction of our great leader, Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Returning
preparation to be alive on all fronts has now brought the German war to its final stage. There was a time some years ago. We must continue fighting till the final count. We know our enemy well. We must expect him to fight hard to save our city.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. President Roosevelt is dead. The president died of a cerebral hemorrhage. All we know so far is that the president died at
An era has come to an end. For us, it is more like the death of a father than of an official.
This nation has suffered this day a staggering loss. Vice President Harry Truman, who from here on will be President Truman, went immediately to the White House.
The gravest question mark in every American heart is about Truman. Can he swing the job? Despite his limited capabilities, I think he can.
He comes into office almost unknown to the people at large, and they will await with great anxiety the result of the test that he has to meet.
Roosevelt was a great architect. Perhaps Truman will be a good carpenter.
When people think of President Truman, it is with a mixture of friendliness, loyalty, and gentle skepticism.
No man ever came to the presidency of the United States under more difficult circumstances than does Harry S. Truman.
It would be foolish to pretend that President Truman possesses the qualities of leadership needed by the nation at the moment.
Engineering courses. I've studied more and worked harder in the last 3 weeks than I ever did before in my life, Harry wrote Bess. He was soon promoted to captain, in charge of Battery D, notorious for their rowdy behavior and for running through captains.
These batteries was pretty well fighters. They had 2 or 3 other captains, and none of them could handle them.
I didn't care much for Truman. I didn't care much for the war with the United States.
He gave the impression of a professor more than he did an artillery officer. He had those thick glasses.
During the first battle of France, Truman proved his mettle. He positioned his battery on a mountain facing German encampments across the valley and began a barrage of fire.
We were firing away, having a hell of a good time doing it. Until we woke somebody.
When the Germans started firing back, a shell burst near Truman, and his horse fell on top of him.
Captain Truman was about the only one who didn't.
Truman couldn't contain his fury. I got up and called them everything I knew, he later recalled. Pretty soon, they came sneaking back. Truman now was convinced about the only. He was the first captain we had who knew what he was doing. In early September, Battery D began a nearly 100-mile march to the front. Under cover of darkness, they trudged through relentless rain and mud. The men and their horses were exhausted.
There was an order that we were not to hold on to the caisson, so as not to put any more burden on the horses. They were in bad shape, but walking along almost dead on your feet, you could hardly resist.
When a colonel saw some of Truman's men holding onto a wagon, he ordered Truman to punish them. Truman refused, telling the colonel that the men were worn out.
We thought that was a pretty fine act on the part of Truman.
The Meuse-Argonne offensive began in September. It would be the largest land offensive ever in military history. Battery D moved into position, setting up their artillery at Chepi. Truman's orders were to protect only his own division. But through his binoculars, he spotted Germans aiming their artillery at another American division. Disobeying orders, he told his men to fire on the Germans.
Truman said, "Fire at will. Fire as fast as you can." And we just poured them in there.
Truman didn't panic. He had his firing data exact. He knocked all 4 of the Germans' guns out.
While Truman was threatened with a court-martial for disregarding orders, nothing came of it. In the final weeks of the war, the 129th Field Artillery moved into action in Verdun. They fired their last shots 15 minutes before the armistice took effect. Harry wrote Bess, "I brought my battery forward under fire and never lost a horse nor a man."
He had a very quiet sort of way of serving as a leader. He was a disciplinarian, but very fair. I can't describe what the personal magnetism was, except that he had it.
He wasn't a military character, especially. He was like a man getting his family around a table and telling them what he could expect of everybody.
In their short time together, Truman won his men's admiration and friendship for life.
Truman had respect for him. His men had a lot of respect for him. That's the way it goes.
At the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, the Great War ended. Truman returned home to independence with a newfound confidence that would serve him well in the future. The confidence to lead.
Harry Truman, who from here on will be President Truman, went immediately to the White House.
Inside in the historic cabinet room, Vice President Harry S. Truman takes the oath of office as 32nd President, administered by Chief Justice Harlan Fisk Stone. Mrs. Truman is at his side. President Truman asks the full Roosevelt cabinet to remain in office, expressing his intention to carry on American policies as formulated by the Roosevelt administration.
western half, the Soviets hold the east and control all roads, rail lines, and rivers leading to Berlin. On June 24, 1948, Stalin orders them closed. The blockade is a hostile move to force out the Western Allies, but Truman does not blink. We stay in Berlin, period. 2 million people live in West Berlin. Without new shipments, its food, fuel, and medicine will run out within a month. To avoid disaster, Truman must act quickly. He decides to take a risk. Supply Berlin by air. He orders servicemen alongside American allies to fly unarmed planes directly over Russian guns. If they shoot, he knows it could start World War III. He gambles that they won't. But the cost is immense. Stalin believes that Truman will fold. He doesn't, and the flights continue. Finally, after almost a year, Truman's persistence wins out. Stalin yields and lifts the siege. But West Berlin remains an isolated democracy behind the Iron Curtain. The Berlin airlift helps cement Truman's new alliance. But across Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world, the line between democracy and communism grows more rigid, more contentious, and more deadly. Under the constant threat of nuclear destruction, the world emerges into a tense, uncertain stalemate, and is gripped by a new kind of war, a Cold War.
The Holocaust is over. But anti-Semitism is not. Across Europe, Jewish survivors returning home are greeted with bigotry and violence. Anti-Jewish riots rage across Eastern Europe.
Jews are universally hated, and all political parties are ready to annihilate everyone. Therefore, we need to leave.
Jews flee to American-run refugee camps, which swell beyond capacity. Truman watches the unfolding humanitarian crisis with a heavy heart. One idea gains momentum: create a Jewish state. Since the 19th century, Jewish immigrants have been slowly building a community in Palestine. Many Jewish leaders argue it's time for the rest of Europe's Jews to join them and finally create a nation of their own. The plan is popular with American voters, and Truman hears it. 33 state legislatures passed resolutions supporting a Jewish state. 250 congressmen signed petitions urging Truman to act. Some of Truman's friends, including Eddie Jacobson, his former business partner, work with Jewish leaders and lobby the president on their behalf.
Tens of thousands of lives depend on words from your mouth and heart. Harry, my people need help, and I am appealing to you to help them.
Truman resents the pressure, especially because he already supports the Zionist cause. Since his time as senator, he has advocated for increased Jewish migration to Palestine. A devout Christian, he is sympathetic to Jewish claims to the Holy Land. But the fate of Palestine isn't Truman's to decide. Since the end of World War I, Britain has ruled the region. They have shut the door to further Jewish immigration. The region is in chaos. Insurgent Jewish militias are waging a terror campaign against British forces. Violence between Jewish and Arab communities is growing worse. With their coffers depleted and unable to strike a peace deal, Britain announces it will pull out of Palestine the following May. The UN has until then to determine the future of the region. The clock is ticking. Truman champions a plan to divide Palestine into Jewish and Arab states, but he encounters resistance from the man he considers the greatest living American, Secretary of State George Marshall. Marshall predicts a costly war if Palestine is partitioned without a peace deal. Angered Arab nations could cut off American access to oil markets, or worse, align themselves with the Soviet Union, destroying the delicate balance of the Cold War. The question of Palestine bitterly divides Truman's administration. Those opposed to partition claim their opponents are recklessly jeopardizing American interests. Those in support accuse the other side of anti-Semitism.
Such a state would have to defend itself with bayonets forever until extinguished in blood.
They could be lifted to the status of other peoples.
We're playing with fire while having nothing with which to put it out.
The choice for our people is between statehood and extermination.
Truman feels the pressure. News has reached him that Jewish leaders plan to declare independence as soon as the British leave. Their militias are the strongest forces on the ground. They see no need to ask permission from the White House or from the UN to claim the homeland they've long desired.
The Jewish state exists because we defend it.
Truman convenes a meeting of his closest advisors on May 12th, just 2 days before the British leave Palestine and Israel declares independence. White House counsel Clark Clifford argues that the United States should immediately recognize the new Jewish state and offer its fullest support.
Perhaps these steps would help atone, in some small way, for the atrocities that occurred during the Holocaust.
George Marshall continues to urge restraint, but it's clear to him that Truman favors recognition. Seizing on Clifford's role as Truman's key campaign advisor, he concludes that this push is a ploy to capture Jewish votes in the upcoming election. Angered, he snaps at Truman.
If in the election I was to vote, I would vote against the president.
It's a stinging rebuke from a man Truman respects. It's also a threat. Marshall is a beloved war hero. If he publicly splits from the president, it could doom his re-election chances. After the meeting, Clifford keeps negotiating with the State Department, trying to find a compromise. In 2 days, the Jewish state will declare independence. Truman needs to make a decision. Finally, at 4 p.m. on May 14th, Clifford's phone rings. Marshall sends word that he won't endorse recognition, but he won't oppose it either. At 6 p.m. Washington time, Israel declares independence. "11 minutes later, Truman formally recognizes the State of Israel. The violence Marshall predicted comes to pass. 5 Arab nations immediately declare war. But the Israelis do something few expect. They win. The United States was the first nation to recognize Israel, forging an enduring alliance between the two countries. Since the founding of Israel, peace in the region has remained elusive. But Truman never regretted his decision.
party outlawed on the basis of its political ideology. Because we've spent 170 years in this country on the basis that democracy is strong enough to stand up and fight for itself against the inroads of any ideology, no matter how much we may disagree with it.
I would not employ any proven or admitted communists because they're just a disruptive force. I don't want them around.
They could be a disruptive force within the motion picture industry. Isn't that true?
Well, of course.
Then don't you think this committee has an obligation to expose them if they are that?
I've always said that you did, but I've always thought that you should do it under the American program of a free and fair trial. You don't need to pass a law to choke off freedom or free speech or deter it from curtailing. Intimidation or coercion will do it just as well. You can't make good and honest motion pictures in an atmosphere of fear.
We want to know what strategic positions in the industry have been captured by these elements, whose loyalty is pledged in word and deed to the interests of a foreign power. It is determined that the hearing shall be fair and impartial. We have subpoenaed witnesses representing both sides of the question. All we are answered are the facts.
June 24th, 1950. Harry Truman is at home in Independence, relaxing after a family dinner. Shortly after 9 p.m., the phone rings. Mr. President, I have some very serious news, says Secretary of State Dean Acheson. Truman listens in grim silence. North Korean troops have invaded South Korea and are marching towards its capital, Seoul. Margaret Truman recalled, my father made it clear that he feared this was the opening of World War III. Korea has been two nations, divided at the 38th parallel since 1945. North Korean leader Kim Il-sung has ordered his troops to unite the Korean peninsula. He's supported by communist China and possibly the Soviet Union. But why should Americans care? 10 months earlier, the Soviet Union exploded its first atomic bomb. Truman and his advisors agreed Korea is another front for communist aggression. It has to be contained. Truman turns to the United Nations. He proposes sending a multinational force to Korea. The Soviets boycott the session, but the UN Security Council approves it. For the first time since the UN was founded, armies of many nations will fight under one flag. But Congress has the constitutional power to declare war. North Korea, however, is advancing quickly. So rather than ask for a vote from Congress, Truman meets with the top congressional leaders of the White House. All parties. For better or for worse, Truman's decision to bypass Congress sets a precedent for future presidents, calling it a police action instead of war. Truman commits to defending South Korea.
We will continue to take every honorable step we can to avoid general war, but we will not engage in a peace.
General Douglas MacArthur wants
Shelly. What now?
I asked, and this is a one-to-one representation. I asked, and this is a one-to-one representation of the Oval Office. No, I'm gonna go downstairs and then come back and then go outside. Is that how it goes? Oh, I just took pictures. I'm doing video. Oh snap.
Having